Mark, thank you. Congressional and FBI investigations, White House confusion, Russia, and alleged memos that have critics calling for the possible impeachment of a president. It's a daily, if not hourly, stress on Americans watching this play out in real time.
Political analyst Peter Mathews is a professor of political science and sociology at Cypress College and the author of the book Dollar Democracy with Liberty and Justice for Some: How to Reclaim the American Dream for All. Welcome back.
Good morning.
Good to see you, Frank and Jessica.
This daily barrage, I mean, I think it affects everybody in some way. You say we've been through this before, something similar?
Nothing like this, believe me. I would just say most Americans are very content with their personal lives. They like to have friends, family, go out for, on a vacation. But this thing is that, from the outside, is coming in and impinging on their personal lives and shaking things up, and people are very unsettled right now. Lots of folks. And even under Nixon's Watergate situation, it wasn't like this. Not in the first 100 days of the presidency. This is the 115th day, and we've got this already.
Right.
It's quite amazing.
So more on that. Many critics want to compare President Trump to former President Richard Nixon, but you say Nixon's presidency and voter approval are actually quite different.
Quite different. Nixon's voter approval was 62% at this time in his presidency. Obama's was 65%. Trump's at 40%. It's quite a bit of difference. And also, the Watergate affair didn't occur until after the 4th year of the presidency. This is happening the 115th day and less than that,
Yeah.
So it's very different. People are concerned about the uncertainty, the fact that you really can't trust what this president is saying fully because he changes his mind, and a lot of investigations going on distracting him from his main platform that he wants to accomplish.
Even if you are a person who doesn't want to have this in your life, if you try to avoid it in the newspaper or whatever, it's everywhere. But you say some people are not?
A few people. I can imagine there's probably the young people who haven't gone to college. Because I can tell you from my students in college, they're very aware of this and very concerned what this could mean for their future and their job prospects and other things. So maybe the students or the young people who haven't gone to college or are working very hard, trying to make ends meet, they're focused on that mostly. And there may be an outside noise for them. It's not really directly involving their lives.
And are they better off for it?
Well, I'm not sure. I think this is a very critical stage in our history.
Yeah.
Everyone should be aware of what's going on right now and try to do something and talk to their members of Congress about it.
Now, critics are calling for the impeachment of our president, and to do so, actually, there's very specific and high standards of proof. What would they be? What are they?
One of them is obstruction of justice, and it just says formally in the Constitution, treason, bribery, or high crimes or misdemeanors. The misdemeanor part can be interpreted by Congress to mean almost anything. Even a dereliction of duty, for example, that's a loose interpretation, and Congress can pretty much use whatever reason they want to vote for articles of impeachment. But I would say the most possibility is obstruction of justice if this Comey memo blows up even further. Because, FBI Director Comey has written a memo when he met with the president, claiming, allegedly, that President Trump asked him to drop the investigation against Michael Flynn. That could be construed, if it's true, we don't know yet, as obstruction of justice. So there may be grounds for impeachment there. But again, it's what Congress wants to define as impeachable, pretty much.
If they decide to move forward with that, and it's a big if, because it would be a huge leap to go to impeachment from where we are right now. But if that happens, what would be the procedure?
The House would actually vote for articles of impeachment by specifying what the basis of it is. Once they vote for it, then it goes to the Senate for trial. So impeachment itself is not the removal of the president. The removal occurs after the impeachment in the Senate, actually. That's how it works. We only had 2 presidents impeached in our history, President Bill Clinton and President Andrew Johnson in the Civil War, and they were never removed. So this is far more serious, and we'll have to see what happens now.
I appreciate you being here this morning. For more information about political analyst and Professor Peter Mathews, you can check out his website. You can also follow him on social media. Thanks for being here. My pleasure. Thank you so much. We need a single-payer system, much more like the other countries that have half the cost of health care per person than we do, and yet you have them, Obama and both Trump, tinkering around the edges here, while the costs of health care go up in tremendous amounts of money, like as he pointed out. So you're going to have a much more efficient way of delivering the health care on a non-profit basis. Our neighbor Canada does it very well, actually, but I don't see too many health insurance companies that will support that.
Vermont rejected it because it was too expensive, and the Colorado voters just defeated single payer. Anybody who thinks that the government can deliver better coverage at a lower cost is absolutely nuts.
We do it in Medicare for the elderly right here.
I would disagree.
And that's what we're hearing.
Medicare we have here.
There's a very small window of time for them to reach agreement on this.
Something that was interesting that he mentioned in his speech was something new, and that was Voice, the victim of immigration crime engagement, that he's ordered the Department of Homeland Security to create an office to serve American victims, and that office is called Voice, which is what I just mentioned.
Peter, does it light another fire?
Absolutely, yes. And I think it's a very bad situation for Trump in that sense. He's got to unite the people and not divide them with these policies and proposals. The real problem with this immigration is that, once again, undocumented folks don't come here for the weather or for the great food that we have, which we do. They could stay in Mexico on the parts, but they come here for the jobs. And that's because of free trade and NAFTA, as Bill Clinton pushed through with Republicans, bipartisan support for free trade, not fair trade, not higher wages, not higher environmental standards, which we should have. And Trump should be talking about that.
Political analyst Peter Mathews is a professor of political science and sociology at Cypress College. He joins us with his insights about who won and lost points during yesterday's testimony. Welcome back. First, James Comey, what worked best for him in his testimony and why?
He came across as a person with integrity whose only concern was to protect the investigation in terms of the possible Russian collusion. So that came across very strongly, and that meant that it lowered the credibility of the president at the same time. So I would say that the winners of this, the testimony was Comey, Kamala Harris, and the FBI.
But there was so much on, just to follow up, the idea that Comey leaked the memo of the events. Now, he did leak it after he left office, but that's become a talking point for Republicans.
Right, and other people have said that it wasn't really a leak. It was basically had to do with an unclassified opinion that he had, and that he got to the news media because he wanted to be able to solicit having a special prosecutor, a special counsel to be brought in. So yeah, that's been accused of being a leak, but other people see it more as an unclassified sharing of a memo with the news media, so something else could be achieved.
You brought up Kamala Harris, Senator from California, really being looked at as a leader, considering her questioning yesterday in the Comey hearing. What more do you want to say?
Yes, indeed. She has ascended so quickly and so fast on the national stage because she came across with such forcefulness when the day before, she was talking to the other gentleman, Rosenstein, and he asking him, will he sign a document saying that he will guarantee independence of a special counsel. He wouldn't do it, but she held her ground. Yesterday, she was able to elicit, in 7 minutes of talking with Comey, elicit something about information that Comey had, and he can't talk about, that Sessions could be implicated further with some Russian connection or something else. So she's able to bring out information without directly confronting, at the same time talking to Comey the right way to get that information. And she came across very, very poised as a strong person, as a strong senator who would not take any no for an answer.
President Trump tweeted this morning something to the effect that he was vindicated through the hearing. You believe that, in fact, former Director Comey has created an uphill battle for President Trump. Why?
Yes, he has. I think the president's been set back a bit because Comey basically came out and said that Trump lied about him and also defamed his character. It's not good to be called a liar by the FBI, former FBI chief. And besides that, a lot of the public does not find Trump to be fully credible. His approval rating went down to 34% yesterday in the Quinnipiac poll, which means from 40% now to 34%, the public is losing faith that he could be consistently believed, whereas Comey came across the other way. And it was Comey's testimony which actually brought that credibility factor down for Trump, unfortunately for him. He's got to build it back up. They're going to try to do so.
How did Comey's testimony put Attorney General Jeff Sessions in a tight corner with how he conducted himself with Comey? Yeah,
I would say that Jeff Sessions really was set back because, first of all, there's already now information that he may have actually not told the truth about something besides the Russian meeting. But besides that, when Comey brought up the fact that the president had cleared the room when they all met for the counterterrorism meeting, there were many advisors there, including Sessions, and Comey had been asked by the president to stay on and discuss something in private, and Comey was uncomfortable. He said, you know, he didn't really want to be there in private, and yet the president insisted, and Sessions also left the room. And then later on, Comey brought that up, and Sessions just shrugged it off, basically, and said, you know, it's not a big deal. So he's lost credibility there, and Sessions is in for more grilling later on. Don't forget there was a private hearing yesterday as well, right, in the afternoon. Right. We don't know what was said there. And I think Sessions is in quite a bit of, maybe possibly in real trouble as we go along. We'll have to wait and see. You know, we can't jump to conclusions yet.
Yeah, it is one, as many people said, one piece of a huge puzzle.
It's a huge puzzle.
We'll see come together over the next few months, maybe even years.
That's true.
All right.
That's very true.
Thank you very much. For more information about political analyst and professor Peter Mathews, check out his website and follow him on social media.
Thank you guys for being here. You've been here for a long time with us all day today. We saw President Trump today being sworn in as our next president. Peter, maybe talk about, we also chatted that they will be sleeping in the White House tonight. Let's take a quick look here. President Trump and First Lady Melania leaving the viewing area to, we assume, go back and get dressed for the balls. They have 3 balls to attend tonight, so the parade's still going on at this hour. Just has probably about 30 more minutes to go. They are headed back to the White House to change. And on that note, Peter, we were talking, tell us a little bit about, they slept somewhere near the White House last night. Tonight They will be in the White House.
Yes, they were in Blair House across the street, which is the president's guest house. Tonight, right in the White House itself. And this is the real thing now. Once you're in the White House, the whole world changes for you. Your outlook changes because now you're in charge of the most powerful country in the world. You've got a major economic reform that's needed right now, and he's been campaigning on getting more jobs. And this is going to be a real focus for him. And the first 100 days, by the way, is a honeymoon period. And that's when presidents have goodwill, usually from the other party itself. And this is a little exceptional. It's not quite that way yet, but still, in this case, Trump has to take the first 100 days initiative to get a lot of those things done, like infrastructure spending, job creation, trade. He said we're going to stop our jobs from being exported to other countries, cheap labor countries. Those are key priorities for him, and he better capitalize on this first 100 days of whatever goodwill he has, which is not a whole lot, because don't forget, he's only got a 40% approval rating right now, which is the lowest of modern-day presidents. But I think he'll have his best shot right now to try to accomplish those things.
Let's talk more about Trump now. And Peter Mathews is a professor of political science at Cypress College. He joins us from Los Angeles. Good to have you with us. Let's go back to that speech, that inaugural speech. What did you make of it?
Very unusual. Most inaugural speeches have very high, lofty ideas that are quite general and appeal to everyone and talk about unity. But in this case, I think Trump's speech was, it dealt with ideas that were anchored in the dismal reality of the working middle class and the working poor, who have lost a lot of ground in the last 10 years or so, or even longer than that. And Trump appealed to them directly, and he had specific proposals about, and even characterized it as saying that Washington has forgotten the American people, the Washington elites and establishment have won, and the American people have lost, so to speak. So he actually used a populist, class-oriented, but mostly nationalism. He said America first. He's going to rebuild the middle class in America. And this is something to be concerned about. I mean, it's certainly understandable why people responded to that. But I think the way to fix some of these problems around the world, or in our own country, is to have the middle class grow around the world. So he wants to also renegotiate NAFTA, for example. And I think the way he should do it is to encourage higher wages in Mexico, higher environmental standards that would match more of the United States standards, and that way there'd be fair trade. But I think he's more of a protectionist. We got to watch out for that. And at the same time, the inaugural speech was very unusual in that sense that he really focused on quite a bit of the negative that was going on in the country at this time, as he did during the campaign, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought it was quite a combative speech, saying that everything's broken in America and it needs fixing. I mean, especially when he had 3 former presidents sitting right behind him.
Quite amazing, isn't it? Because those 3 presidents were in office during those years that he's claiming this thing happened. But there really are a lot of people suffering. The question is, he should have focused a bit more on how to bring people together to fix this problem, rather than having it one group against the other. And I think that it's going to be a very interesting next 4 years, especially since he has a Republican Congress, some of whom don't agree with these ideas. That's very his own party, some of them don't agree with it, others do. So you may have to bring on board some of the Democrats. And you know, there's a slight amount of Bernie Sanders message in this kind of speech, that the middle class has lost out, the gap between rich and poor has grown considerably, and to fix the economy, to fix the middle class, to bring it back, you have to fix give more money in the people's hands who are working, so they can go out and buy the products and have a better life in the middle class lifestyle.
I mean, with all these big promises to fix people's lives, I mean, he's based his whole campaign on that. He won the presidency based on those promises. Can he actually deliver?
Well, that only depends on if he's able to get Congress to work with him. And for that, you have to have a certain type of approach, and that is a consensus approach, a compromise approach, willing to work with other people and not think you can do it on your own, because the president cannot do it on his own. Even Donald Trump can't do it on his own. He has to bring aboard a lot of the other members of Congress of both parties, and to get the American people activated for a positive agenda in this sense. At the same time, not alienating some of the folks who were in power earlier. They have to be brought along as well if possible, but he's going to rely mostly on the working people, and he's got to bring the 2 parties together for this kind of change. I don't think he can do it on his own, absolutely not.
Peter Mathews, great to speak to you. Thanks for joining us there from Los Angeles.
Well, Peter Mathews is a professor of political science at Cypress College in California and author of Dollar Democracy. Morning to you, Peter.
Good morning. How are you doing, Claire?
Very well. Now, listen, let's talk about Theresa May going over as early as next month to visit. He will then be President Trump, won't he, of course? How important is that relationship to him, do you think?
How close is the relationship, did you say?
Yeah, how important is it to him, his relationship with the UK?
It's extremely important. I mean, Britain has always been considered a very special relationship with the United States, starting with way back in our culture and our history, but also World War II. After World War II, in the security alliances, Britain was a leader with the U.S., with NATO, and not to mention the Lend-Lease Act during the war. A lot of things are very special between Britain and the United States. So Mr. Trump would like to keep this special relationship, even though Mrs. May had criticized him early on during the election for wanting to ban Muslims outright from the country and the statements that he made about women. She has come aboard now and said, this man is president now, I want to work with him. And we get along well. She actually flattered him, and she gets along well with him.
Yeah,
so that should be a very good thing.
Is he on the front foot rather than her? I mean, you say, you know, that there has been a special relationship, but that's ancient history, isn't it? When you're talking about Donald Trump, he's already criticised NATO. He's criticised a lot of the agencies that the US has been involved in and paid money into over the years to say, well, all bets are off now. This is a whole new era we're moving into. So does he hold the whip hand in this meeting?
He does, actually, and that's a concern because we don't know which way he might go at any given moment. And we're hoping many of his advisors, or some of them, would be stable enough and experienced enough to rein him in and keep him in line in terms of what he needs to do to be a serious world leader, and not to just, make statements like they did about China recently, about meeting with, having taken a phone call from the Taiwanese president, which caused a ruckus. So those kinds of things have to be really looked at carefully. Can he actually be the leader that the United States has been? Or will he just go off and do things that are so unpredictable that we don't know what that'll do for the British-American relationship, or for that matter, the EU relationship with Britain, or the Russian relationship with the United States? It's a lot of things at stake here.
And up now, a really fantastic guest host who's frequently on KPFK these days, Peter Mathews with special programming.
Hello, everyone. This is Peter Mathews on KPFK, the day after Christmas, the day that's supposed to be about compassion and justice and fairness, and sometimes it's been distorted a lot, hasn't it? Well, we'll get back to the original meaning of it by talking about these key issues. We'll be talking about LAUSD's ethnic studies requirement that was passed, a remarkable move compared to Arizona, which actually banned ethnic studies recently. And we're going to look at that, and the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant. Earthquake faults have been discovered on the plant recently. And not only that, but cancer rates, other kinds of disease rates have gone up in the studies that came out about Diablo Canyon. And we're going to interview Harvey Wasserman, author of Solartopia, Our Green-Powered Earth, and a leader in the movement to shut down Diablo Canyon. We'll also be dealing with money in politics issue and its influence of money on the 2015 federal budget, the giveaways to Wall Street and the super rich, the waste and fraud in military spending. And we're going to look at that and look at how the military and the Pentagon have been misappropriating our funds, not even keeping track of it, so that soldiers' paychecks have been shortchanged. Boondoggle weapon systems like the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter have had our money wasted on it. Unjust and unnecessary wars like the wars in Iraq and even today in Afghanistan. And cuts to education and social programs because of a bloated military budget. We'll look at all of that. And not only that, we're going to come on and talk about the increasing income and wealth gap between the rich and poor in America and the world, and the disappearing middle class. And last but not least, we're going to look at social mobility in the United States having dropped behind that of the social democracies in Europe. In other words, for an American to be able to go from the working class or the working poor or middle class to the upper middle class and the upper class, that chance has been reduced now compared to in countries like Britain and Sweden and Denmark, where it's actually gone up. The chance of higher social mobility is higher there than here, and it goes right to what we're doing wrong in politics and economics and money in politics in America. But we will look at every one of these problems, ladies and gentlemen, and find solutions. We're not going to just be negative about things, but actually show how we can fix things in a positive way for this great country of ours. And last but not least, it's very important that we're going to have the lines open at 4:30 for the public to come in and tell us what you think about these issues and give us some of your solutions and ideas, because it's a two-way street, not just one way. And I would like to actually start with the more detailed assessment of the ethnic studies requirement. The Los Angeles Unified School District just passed a ruling recently that ethnic studies classes will be required as a graduation requirement for high schoolers in Los Angeles. And I think that's an excellent recommendation because, actually it's a requirement, because once we study the history and the economics of people of all ethnic groups in America that help make up this country, from Native Americans to African Americans to Latinos and other groups, Asian Americans, then all of us can appreciate each other much better, not just tolerate, but actually appreciate the cultures and the backgrounds, and then we will be able to come together on political and economic justice and social justice. Issues like lack of educational opportunity and tuition skyrocketing right now while students can't afford to graduate and to even go to school in many cases, and they're taking longer to graduate. Those issues will help. This will bring us together to solve those issues.
Peter Mathews, is this going to be it? A protectionist zeitgeist, a recoiling of American power?
I don't think so entirely. There'll be a movement in that direction, but we can't do that entirely. And the United States is the one number, it's a global power, the superpower still, extension all over the world with military bases, with diplomacy. So I don't think Trump will be able to come up with an isolationist policy, but there'll be more balancing of focus on domestic policy and having other countries take their share of the burden in foreign affairs. At the same time, we'll still be engaged with the world. I think Trump is talking about more like fair trade, not free trade, but fair trade, where the terms of trade are more even. So he wants to renegotiate some of those trade agreements, like NAFTA, for example, and he's against TPP entirely. So it wasn't against trade or international involvement. It's a more balanced, nuanced way of doing it. Now, it'll be interesting to see what Bernie Sanders' influence will be there as well, because Bernie Sanders had a tremendous groundswell of support against our job exports and outsourcing of our jobs, the gap between rich and poor. And Trump is a right-wing populist, unlike Bernie Sanders, more of a progressive left-wing populist. But some of those ideas do come together in a sense. I just hope that Trump stays on message about uniting the country and not speaking about ethnic differences in a negative way or immigration bashing. I think if you could unite the country and bring people together now in a new way of saying, this is a new era. Right?
Well, staying on the subject, joining me now is Peter Mathews. He's a professor of political science at Cyprus College and joins me from Los Angeles. Good to have you on the programme. Pollsters have been seriously battered and wrong globally in the past 12 months. We saw the Canadian general election completely go in a different direction. Many pollsters in the United Kingdom thought that the British people would not vote to leave the European Union. So how seriously can we take the role of pollsters and the way that they are perhaps guessing who might win the general election in the United States?
Take it somewhat with a grain of salt, although we have to give pollsters some credit. But here's the reason pollsters have been off so far recently, is there are many, this is a winds of change time, and many people are upset at the status quo, and they're not normally regular voters. In the case of Brexit, many people voted for the first time, and they voted for Brexit when it wasn't predicted that they would do so. The same thing in the United States. Many voters that Trump is bringing in are new voters who don't get factored in the polls. So there could be a hidden vote there for who are dissatisfied voters, angry voters who've lost their jobs, who see no hope right now in the country. And yet, Hillary Clinton has a tremendous chance to win because of the fact that she has a big machine with her. The ground game with the Democrats is superb. They have lots more money than Trump to pay people to go to the polls, to go door to door. I'm sorry, to go door to door to get people to the polls. They can have paid volunteers to do that. Part of the Democratic machinery. They have President Obama, President Clinton. They have Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders campaigning for her all over the country. And Donald Trump is basically himself and his vice presidential running mate and a few other people and lots of volunteers. So it's very unpredictable what would happen if Trump turns out voters that don't normally vote. And a lot of them are actually Democrats who've lost jobs to outsourcing. So Hillary has to hold on to those people and look at the swing states. The swing states' polling numbers have narrowed recently. In Florida, Hillary is winning by about 2%. In Pennsylvania, a very, very important state for Hillary, she's winning by 3%, but she was up by 12% just a couple of weeks ago. In Michigan, it's down to a 4% margin of victory for Hillary, actually more than 3% right now after an 8% lead for a long time.
Peter, sorry to interrupt. Let me just come in there, Peter, because there's lots of things that you've hit on. Yes. And the thing is that, you talk about these polls and, up and down as they have been across the states. Much is being made of early voting and people that have voted very early, but also much is being made of those that are yet undecided and will go to the polls on November the 8th. How important are that group of people and how large are they according to pollsters?
The group that who's not decided yet is between 5 and 8%. And that is significant because it only takes a few of them in one state or two states, such as Pennsylvania or Florida, to switch sides and then the other side wins the electoral votes, which are huge numbers in those two large states. So that number of undecided voters is very late in the game now, and they still haven't decided yet. But they will go in there and vote, and some of them may be voters who secretly favor one candidate but don't say that to the pollsters. That's where the unpredictability comes. They're a very important group, actually. And both sides are trying to win them over by going all over the place right now in those states.
Indeed, and very few days left. They say a week is a long time in politics. I think 4 days certainly will. For the moment, Peter Mathews, thank you.
Yeah, and the Republicans and indeed the President-elect Donald Trump have all said that they would like to keep some aspects of Obamacare. Which aspects do you think they should keep and why?
Well, I personally think they should keep all of them and then expand on them and make the United States have a comprehensive universal system like all the other countries that are civilized in the world. Britain, for example, you have the NHS, you have single-payer health care in Canada, Medicare for all. We need to have something like that over here, and I think that if they do keep some of those portions of it, they must at least keep the part that says that no insurance company can kick you off the plan just because you have a pre-existing condition. And also that young people who are under the age of 26 can remain on their parents' insurance until they're 26 years old. These are all very incremental steps that Obama took. And in my book, Dollar Democracy, I say in the chapter on healthcare, I call Obamacare a small step in the right direction. It should have been expanded to a public option or a single-payer type of nonprofit medical insurance system, as in Canada, Medicare for all, as we have here for the elderly. That would be the way to go, in my opinion. But seeing Republicans, the majority, and Donald Trump coming in as a Republican president, it's going to be very tough for anyone to get anything done in that direction. So more than likely, we'll start to see some cuts in Obamacare and some real revisions to it. Not entirely, though.
Well, you mentioned the NHS here in the UK. I mean, we're very used to the idea of universal health care here. It seems like a no-brainer to us. Why has Obamacare been so controversial in the US?
Because mainly of the lobbyists, the various wealthy lobbying groups that donate money to campaigns to members of Congress to get elected with their money. And then they owe these lobbyists something. The health insurance industry lobbyists, so it used to be the American Medical Association at one time used to be against it, the universal health care. They were lobbyists from the pharmaceutical companies, the drug companies. All these very special interest groups are able to keep away a concept of universal health care and to vilify it as being socialized medicine. Well, frankly, most of our allies have socialized medicine or some forms of it, as Canada does, and it works very well. Those countries like Britain and Canada have longer life expectancy than the United States people itself. We have shorter life expectancy. We have larger rates of infant mortality here in this country than the other countries, and we have other kinds of problems that the outcomes of which are a result of not having universal health care. Even with Obamacare today being implemented, about 20 million Americans are left uncovered. And if the Republicans repeal the entire Obamacare, 20 million Americans who actually receive coverage will lose their coverage as well. So a total of 15 million Americans that should actually be covered fully are only partially covered now, and about 30 more million would lose their coverage entirely. And that's not good at all for anyone. And it'd make all of us, even those of us who have health care, even more in jeopardy of our health when people around us are not healthy. And it's just not a humane thing to do. So that's why I would urge President Donald Trump to go in the other direction and say, look, let's expand it, make it efficient, single-payer, non-profit health insurance, as in Canada, as we have for the elderly here, lower overhead costs, no deductibles, no co-payments, and people will go see the doctor more regularly and get preventive care and live longer, and that would be the way to go for America.
Yeah, indeed. We'll have to wait and see exactly how long it takes and exactly what happens. For now, though, Peter Mathews, great to talk to you. Thank you for joining us here on Sky News.
Let's talk to Peter Mathews. He was the Democratic Party's nominee for the U.S. Congress in 1998, and he's also the author of Dollar Democracy. He's joining us now live from Los Angeles. Thank you very much indeed for your time, sir. Alan was talking about the money men and the influence that they have in terms of the Republican Party, but this is also relevant to the Democrats as well. Give us some indication of how you think the big money, as it were, for the remaining few weeks of this campaign is going to move in terms of both the Democrats and the Republicans.
Yes, very interesting. There's a big difference in the two sides because on the Republican side, the candidates have to raise private money, big money, from corporate PACs and also from super PACs and donors. But on the Democratic side, Bernie Sanders, the candidate who's challenging Hillary still, has a tremendous base of donors of over 7 million donations, and he's raised hundreds of thousands of dollars already, at least over $100,000, and he still keeps getting the money coming in, so he can actually last a lot longer than Ted Cruz could, because Ted Cruz had a very devastating loss today, over double digits, and he is dropped out, as you know. So I think it's different on the Democratic side because Bernie Sanders is vowed to go all the way through the conventions, all the way into the convention, and even take it to a floor fight because his ideals are important for him and his followers. And Hillary has to bring those Bernie followers over if she can. Many of them are very skeptical because they believe in no money in politics. They want private, small money, small donors like themselves, not the big corporate donors that Hillary has taken. This has to be worked out in some way or the other. But it is a different scene on the Democratic side than the Republican side.
Yeah, but Peter, I wanted to ask, I mean, Sanders has made a significant impact on this campaign, not least because he was competing against Clinton, but also in many ways he seems to have been setting the agenda for many of the discussions that were going on during the campaign, and also the fact that he, if I understand correctly, he at one point in March raised $44 million on his own. I think Clinton at the time only raised 21.9. I'm sure you're more across the figures than I am.
Yes.
Give me an indication.
Those figures are correct.
Well, give me an indication where you think Sanders is going to, what role Sanders is going to play in the event that Clinton does make the presidency.
Well, let's first backtrack a bit. Clinton has to still win 2,383 delegates, including her pledged delegates and superdelegates, because by the pledged delegates alone, she's going to fall short of the 2,383. And so will Sanders. So it looks like the key players are going to be the superdelegates, and Sanders is going to make a very big pitch to the superdelegates saying, I'm the stronger candidate. The polls are showing me ahead of Trump, far ahead of Trump, whereas Hillary is much closer. And I saw one poll where Hillary is actually tied with Trump right now. So Sanders is going to try his best to say, we brought new people in. We can activate excitement among the Democrats and the independents. I can even win Republican votes, Sanders will say, as he has in Vermont before. And he'll portray himself as a stronger candidate that can take on Trump and defeat him. And he'll say that Hillary has too many weaknesses. Of course, that's to be expected that he's going to say that. The question is, will the delegates buy it?
Well, joining me now for more on the bill is Peter Mathews. He's a professor of political science at Cypress College in Los Angeles. Professor, thank you very much for joining us. Now, explain to us, what does this bill actually mean? Because the 9/11 Commission report back in 2004 found no evidence that the Saudi government as an institution or senior officials individually funded the organization.
That's correct. It's called the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, or JASTA. It was passed unanimously by the U.S. Senate. And what the bill means is, if it does become law, is that American citizens can sue foreign governments that sponsor terrorism on their soil, on our soil. So it's a very serious bill because President Obama has threatened to veto the bill. He says it will complicate international law because if that can happen, then it could happen in the opposite direction as well, that the U.S. government could get sued by foreign nationals who are victims of, say, what you call collateral damage in a drone strike, for example, where innocent families get killed by a military action of the U.S. So Obama is very loath to have this pass, and yet the Senate's unanimous vote indicates that when the House gets it, it'll probably pass by a large number of votes, in which case the president's veto will not be sustained. It'll actually be overridden, and it'll become law anyways. It's a very tricky situation right now, very precarious one between U.S. and Saudi relationships.
Let's talk about those relations. We're talking about up to $750 billion in assets that could be potentially sold.
Yes, that's what the Saudi government has threatened to do if this act becomes law. And that's a lot of money that the Saudis will unload that they've lent the U.S. government, and it'll create a lot of havoc with the markets and with the fiscal policy. So we're looking at some serious ramifications if this bill does pass. Yet you can understand that many Congress members are very concerned about voting against an act like this, which seems to have such popular support. It sounds like it's the victims of the 9/11 attacks that are due some justice. By the way, in 2005, the victims of the 9/11 families did take court action, and the judge ruled in a district court here in the United States that the Saudi government was not liable, that it was in fact not allowed to be a defendant. It's not going to be a defendant in the actual action because the act doesn't apply to it. The judge said this action originated outside the United States, and therefore the Saudi government was not culpable in any way or even be able to be sued by the victims of the family. So that ruling in 2005 was the beginning, the first shot in this direction. Again, in 2015, when the court case came up again, a judge ruled in the opposite direction, saying that, yes, the victims' families can sue the Saudi government or any government that sponsors terrorism if it does.
Let's get more on this story. We're joined by Peter Mathews, who's Professor of Political Science and author of Dollar Democracy with Liberty and Justice for Some, joining us from Los Angeles in California. Many thanks for joining us, Peter. I believe some of these electoral college voters have even received death threats. I mean, what are the chances that these electors will vote their own way and go against the mandate of the people in their state?
I think the chances are quite small, actually. They'll need 37 electors, Republican electors, to switch over to the Democratic side, Hillary, and for her to be able to win this over Trump. And I think only one Republican elector has come out publicly. He's from Texas and said that he's not going to be supporting Trump. He's the only so-called faithless elector. But we've got to go back to history a little bit. Alexander Hamilton, one of the founders, in Federalist Paper number 68, he set up the reason for the Electoral College. He said that in case the public chooses the wrong person out of misinformation or whatever, a passion, that a group of selected people, selected by the leaders of the country, would be able to actually vote for the presidency and make a much more reasoned judgment. Now, that'll go down very hard with the Trump supporters if the electors switch over and vote for Hillary. Although Hillary won 3 million more votes, approximately 3 million more votes than Donald Trump, popular votes, the way the system is set up, the electoral votes are the only ones that count, and it's based on per state electoral count. So the smaller states, the rural states, actually have the numerical advantage because each state has 2 senators, for which there are 2 electors, in addition to House electors, and it doesn't matter what population the state has. So the states that are smaller in number have more numbers of electors in the Electoral College than their population would warrant. So it does have a small bias toward the rural states and smaller states where Donald Trump did very well, actually. It's a very big conundrum right now, but I don't think it's going to be switching over and flipping to Hillary Clinton. That's my educated guess. You never know what could happen.
Okay, but looking ahead, I mean, given we've seen this sort of discrepancy happen, do you think that we could see the entire system change? Because there have been calls for it to be scrapped.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, it's happened twice. When Al Gore was not elected, although he got more popular votes, and again this time, within less than 20 years, it's happened twice. And there have been many calls to just abolish the Electoral College. And I believe that would be a good move, and I think that we may see some movement here. We'll take a constitutional amendment, which means that 2/3 of the House and the Senate have to vote for the amendment to propose it, and 3/4 of the states have to ratify it. That's the main way of doing it. So that's also a tough call, but a lot of popular pressure now. The majority of Americans actually want to abolish the Electoral College. About a little over 50% say they should abolish it and let the people decide. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens. This is probably the only one election which brought this whole issue of the Electoral College to the forefront, like no other election before.
For tonight's Conversations with Great Minds, I'm joined by one of America's leading progressive voices, political scientist Peter Mathews. Currently a professor of political science at Cypress College, an adjunct professor of sociology at Long Beach City College. Peter is a political analyst and a radio talk show host in addition to being an academic. He's also seen how the political system works from the inside. In 1988, he was the Democratic nominee for Congress from the district surrounding Long Beach, California. Peter's new book, The Dollar Democracy with Liberty and Justice for Some, How to Reclaim the American Dream for All, is a must-read expose of how our government has been hijacked by big money. Peter Mathews, welcome.
It's great to be here with you, Tom. How are you doing tonight?
I'm well, and thank you for joining us from our Los Angeles studio. I'd like to start with you, Peter. You're a professor of political science, radio host, former congressional candidate, activist. What would you say is the guiding principle in everything you do, and how did you first get into politics or interested in politics?
Well, you know, I was actually a psychology major in college, and when I went to Europe and I saw the Berlin Wall, that changed everything. So I crossed over into East Germany and talked to the people there and asked how they lived. And pretty soon I started to recognize there were a lot of walls around the world, you know, and the walls between rich and poor, between men and women, between different ethnicities. And I took some classes in international relations and world politics when I got back to college that summer. And I said, this is the field I need to try to explore more. So I went ahead and double majored in psychology and political science to find out more about economic development, exploitation, neo-imperialism over time, and imperialism itself. So it was very interesting to me. I've traveled to 27 countries to actually find a way to reduce those walls and create more justice, Tom. Equal opportunity and equal justice for all is, to me, my basic goal in life, to help with that.
You've written a book called Dollar Democracy with Liberty and Justice for Some. In fact, here's the book. Tell us about the book. Why did you decide to write it?
Well, I decided to write the book because I was noticing that many of my students were having increasingly difficult time making it through college, and it wasn't their fault whatsoever. In California, we had tuition-free education from the 1960s to the 1980s until the elites took it away by giving corporate tax loopholes to oil companies and other big businesses. And in turn, they went ahead and cut subsidies for public education in universities and colleges and started raising the tuitions by several hundred%. And my students couldn't make it. They had to drop out and go work full-time and go to school part-time. So their American dream was being delayed and in many cases completely taken away. And I thought this was totally unjust, not just in education, but in every single area of our lives, policy areas, in healthcare, in the environment, in our food supply, in the Wall Street crash. In every one of those areas, you see the hand of dollar democracy, Tom, where $6.2 billion was raised and spent in 2012 alone on federal candidates. This year it'll even be more. And this started before super PACs. It started before Citizens United, when the biggest corporations bought both parties, including much of the Democratic Party, not all of it. We've got exceptions like Senator Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and other grassroots people like Senator Wellstone who refused corporate money and won the right way. But the majority of Democrats and almost all the Republicans have been bought at the federal and state level, and our middle class is suffering, and so is our country, and we cannot survive without a middle class. You know, Aristotle said that, Jefferson said it, we all know it.
Yeah.
So that's what happened. I wrote the book for that reason.
Is that what you mean when you say dollar democracy, basically democracy that's been bought and paid for?
It's been bought and paid for through the areas of election financing as well as lobbying. Don't forget the lobbying part. In many cases, lobbying consumes even more money where these corporations take legislators on vacation, working vacations to Hawaii, for example. That was done with our California state legislators by the energy and pharmaceutical and oil companies for vacation in Maui to discuss issues such as oil taxes or the lack thereof. So these lobbyists have bought and paid in election campaigning as well as lobbying our Congress and our elected leaders from city council on up. And I believe the way to turn it around is to go through several things: public financing of elections, as they have in Maine and Arizona.